My name is Sister Colleen Gibson. I'm a sister of St. Joseph, and for our webinar today, I'm going to kind of act as our moderator slash facilitator slash the voice of the people. So before we begin, just a reminder that today's webinar is being recorded, and so we'll put that recording up. You won't be visible because we won't hear any of your voices, but we'll be able to see Phyllis's face and my own as we move through the day. So for today's webinar, it'll be broken into two parts. If you've been on one of these webinars before, you kind of know the drill, but for anybody who's new, we'll begin, and Phyllis will talk a little bit about the commission, a little bit about her work on women deacons, her research. It's very, very interesting. And then we'll open up the floor for questions. And some people have emailed questions in advance, so I'll ask those, but then you can also use the chat function here on Zoom. So if you click down on the bottom of your screen, you'll see the chat button. And if you have any questions throughout our conversation, you can type them in, and then I'll moderate those questions to Phyllis. And I think we're in store for a great conversation today. And so thank you for being here. And before we begin, just a brief introduction of Phyllis, who needs no introduction, but that's what I get paid the big bucks for, to give this. So just a bit of an introduction. So Dr. Phyllis Zagano is the Senior Research Associate in Residence in the Department of Religion at Hofstra University. She's an award-winning author and the editor of over 20 books. She's the author of Women Deacons, Past, Present, and Future from Paulist Press, and she authors the popular Just Catholic column in the National Catholic Reporter. She's an internationally acclaimed Catholic scholar and lecturer on topics of contemporary spirituality and women's issues in the Church. She was appointed by Pope Francis to the Papal Commission for the Study of Women in the Diaconate in August of 2016. She's respected the world over for her candor and scholarship, and it's our pleasure today to be able to join in conversation and to engage this very important topic. So without further ado, I give it over to Phyllis Zagano.
Thank you. I have to tell you right away that if I look a little strange on things, because I'm watching to see as people join. We usually have a Hofstra University employee on with us, but they have a meeting, so I have to manage the webinar myself. So I'm letting people in as they sign in, and we've got a good crowd today. Thanks, Colleen. I got back from Rome last night. I was there for about 10 days. I attended the meetings of the International Union of Superiors General and was at the meeting when the Holy Father gave an envelope to the president of the International Union of Superiors General, Sister Carmen Sammet, that included, as I understand it, some of the findings or something. I don't know what the sisters got. I don't know what the Pope gave them. And so I'm kind of at a loss because none of this has been made public. And because none of it has been made public, certainly I can't directly address the commission. But it was an exciting time in Rome. I attended about four or five of the public meetings and one of the private meetings of the International Union of Superiors General, who met out at a hotel on the Via Aurelia for 4 days, and then on the 5th day were in the St. Peter's Basilica for Mass, and then we're at the in the Aula Paul VI for the papal audience. And the Holy Father walked in with Sisters Carmen Sammet, who is the president of UISG, and Sister Pat Farrell, who is the executive director. And he was in the middle of the two of them as they walked down the big aisle. If you've seen him at any of the audiences, he walks down the aisle. And then they went down, and you can see it on Vatican News. You can see a tape of the entire thing, actually. There's a feed of it. He was greeted and by Pat Farrell, and then Sister Carmen Sammet was going to read her speech, but in the meantime he gestured for his big chair to be taken away and for 2 chairs to be put at this small table with 1 microphone, and he told Sister Carmen to sit next to him. And nobody knew this would happen. She was a little stunned, And she said, I never thought I'd be seated at the right hand of the Pope. And he quite genuinely took notes as she spoke. And he then, he spoke, and he said, he had papers in his hands. He said, you know, I've got a prepared speech here. It's kind of boring, so I'll just give it to you and you can read it. So what I want to do is I'll say a few words, and then I will, I'd like to take questions from you. And he spoke quite eloquently about the major topic of the sisters' meeting, which was about trafficking and to a certain extent about abuse. But they were opening a Talitha Cum exhibit in the Ala Pola 6, which he blessed on his way in, and then he said, you know, that there was a report from his commission, which included me, and that basically everybody didn't agree. So he was giving a report to, or something. I don't want to call it a report because I don't know what it is, but he gave something to Sister Carmen Samet and said, you can do with it what you want, which to me means she can publish it. And he says, these are the few things that they agreed on, or the things that they agreed on. And of course, the things that he said the commission disagreed on was the historicity of the sacramentality of the ordination of women as deacons. He said, for me to make a sacramental decree, I need more. I need more theological and historical work. And the commission members are doing their own work, continuing their own writing and work. So I'm sitting there going, well, I'm the only commission member who's publishing on this topic, Father. So I guess those are my rudder orders. And I was very, very taken by his genuine interest in the topic, but the total genuineness with which he met the sisters in the meeting. Now there are 850 general superiors in this meeting. It's about half the number of members of the UISG, the International Union of Superiors General, and I tell you, any one of them could run a country. When you think of it, these are really sharp women, very powerful women. In any event, as I said, you can see the whole thing on Vatican News. He took questions, and the first question was from a sister in German, a German sister speaking in German, saying, "Come on already! You know, how much more do you need? We are women, and we deserve to be treated equally." And she spoke very forcefully on behalf of the topic of the ordination of women as deacons. The second question was from an Italian sister who said, "We sisters are fine just as we are. We don't need to be ordained as deacons." So, and then there were another question about abuse. There was some and another question about ecumenism. And a question about, very interesting question about kind of Laudato Si. She said, I think she was a sister from Sudan. We have poor people and they go, and we're concerned about the environment. People create fires to make charcoal, to bring into the town, to sell to people to cook their food. This is not only a means of livelihood for the people, but it's a means of people having charcoal to cook food. You know, how can we tell people that it's not good to have, to have open fires, And in any event, his comments were beautiful. He stayed. He was funny at the end. He arrived at 12 and he left at 1. And he stood up and he said, "Thank you very much. I need to get back to the house for lunch if there's any left," and because he did stay over a little bit, and so that was that. So then Friday afternoon, that was Friday the 10th of May. Friday afternoon, some colleagues of mine, Luke Hansen, who is at the Bellarmino, which is the Jesuit residence for Jesuit students in Rome and faculty. He hosted a meeting of a bunch of journalists. We had Reuters, we had America Magazine, we had ASCA, the Italian news agency, Vida Nueva, which is Spanish, Vatican Insider, I think I said Reuters, New York Times, and La Croix, and a couple of other folks. And what I had said was, I have not really spoken to media. I've only given public lectures and webinars. But I said I would, and Josh McElroy from National Catholic Reporter, and I just sent Colleen a link to share of Josh's report of that meeting. So it was very fruitful. What I was able to speak about, and I wasn't even reacting to what the Holy Father had said. You know, previous to that, you may have seen in the news that the Holy Father spoke on the plane back from Bulgaria. He had the English language question Tuesday night was from Josh McElroy saying, you know, you were just visiting the Bulgarian Orthodox who happen to have women deacons. You know, what are you going to talk about? So he basically said what he said to the sisters. Although with the sisters, he was quite. The people who have been writing to me who are hopeful about it, they're saying it's very hopeful that he said to make a sacramental decree, which means he's not thinking about a second-class diaconate for women. It's either you have women deacons or you don't. And so I'm very hopeful. On Wednesday, I was saying to folks, I'm probably the only person in Rome who's totally at peace about this, because I think the man is, first of all, he's way far smarter than I am. And I think he's engendering international conversation on the topic right now. Because the history is there. What goes on inside the commission, I can tell you, and as I told the journalists, this conversation has been going on for 400 years. And there are two teams, you know, either were ordained or weren't ordained, can be ordained, can't be ordained. So anyway, Colleen, do you have questions? I don't want to take up all the time here. I've spoken for about 15 minutes.
I do, Phyllis. I have a number of questions and a bunch about kind of the UISG and also on the commission. So let's start with one of the first ones that came in. Do you have anything to say about the Pope's comments during the UISG? Specifically, one of the quotes that was sent along was, we cannot go beyond revelation and dogmatic expression. We are Catholics. If someone wants to make another church, they are free to do so.
Right. Yeah, some people were a little annoyed at that. First of all, revelation is that we're all made in the image and likeness of God. So that's probably a good place to start. I mean, that's probably about as far as I'd go. If he was going to make a sacramental decree, he has to have proper theological support, and that begins with Scripture. And but the thing about women deacons, it's not a dogmatic question, at least in my mind. And I'm not criticizing the Pope. I'm just talking about my own research and what I have published. That it's what's called technically a merely ecclesiastical law. That the diaconate faded, actually was put out of business practically in the 11th century with the Gregorian reforms, the great reforms of Gregorio Sette. And to understand that, to understand how those reforms work, in my case or in my interest, we have to look into the question of the diaconate. Gregory was a deacon, and he was elected Bishop of Rome. And he's the first deacon elected Bishop of Rome to insist on being priested before he became a bishop. And it's at that time in the 11th century with the Gregorian reforms, and then following with the codification by Gratian, that the thing called the cursus honorum came in, which means you're tonsured, you become a porter, then a lector, then an exorcist, then an acolyte, then a subdeacon, then a deacon, and finally a priest. But with the Gregorian reform, no one could enter those steps, could enter the cursus honorum, unless he was on his way to be a priest. Well, women were never in the cursus honorum. Women deacons lasted really into the 11th century. We have evidence in the West of Otoni, of Lucca, having women deacons. And certainly in the Maronite tradition, we have their canons from the 18th century regarding women deacons. But the law is what created the public perception that every deacon can become a priest, which is not correct. And of course, since the Second Vatican Council, and with the two documents, one in 1967, another in 1972, we find that, first of all, the minor orders are suppressed, as well as the major order of subdeacon, and the minor orders are replaced in a way by the installed ministries of lector and acolyte. And the diaconate then becomes a separate ministry unto itself, mentioned in 2006 by Benedict XVI in its speech with the priests of Rome, and again codified with a thing called omnium in mentem, a motu proprio, which added a third paragraph to the canon 1008, and that third paragraph reflects the catechism. That third paragraph basically says the diaconate is not the priesthood. I mean, that's the bottom line. So I hope that's helpful. I mean,
okay, that's very, very interesting, Phyllis. Another question that came about the commission and the work that you did, and it's geared towards the various members who were on the commission. Mm-hmm. And the question was, did the various members base their viewpoints on the roles, ordinations, and titles of women throughout history? Did they use different research sources, or can you talk about the background of the different people who were on the commission with you?
Yeah, I cannot talk at all about anybody's opinion within the commission. I can talk about their background and tell you who they are. First of all, they're all really smart. They're really, really nice people. And three of us were nominated by the UISG, the International Union of Superiors General. That would be me. And they told me they were really surprised when my name was accepted. UISG was asked to hand deliver the names of 8 people, and I was one of them. Another one who was on their list and accepted was Nuria Kalduk-Banaj. Nuria is a professor of scripture at the Biblicum in Rome. She also teaches at the Gregorian in Rome. She's also a member of the Pontifical Biblical Commission. She also speaks 7 languages. She also reads 4 or 5 more. Things like, aside from, the ordinary ancient Greek and Latin, I mean, stuff like Syriac and wonderful, wonderful person, very, very busy. The other sister who was on the list was Mary Maloney. I'm looking at the list in front of me. Mary Maloney is a Franciscan sister. She's the first woman dean of a Roman theologate. She's the dean of the Antonianum. She's a specialty in the scripture, in the spirituality of Clare of Assisi, but she's a force to be reckoned with. She's the youngest. She's funny and smart. And everybody else is too. Francesca Cocchini is a patristic scholar. I'll start with the women. So you got Nuria, you got Mary. Francesca Cocchini is a scripture scholar, a patristic scholar at Sapientia, which is the Roman Harvard, and also at the Augustinianum, which is the Augustinian theologate. The folks over at Villanova University. Look down the list for women. Mariana Schlosser is a professor of spirituality and a translator. She's from Germany. She teaches in Vienna. I saw her yesterday at breakfast. She in the Vatican. She's also a member of the International Theological Commission, and a very, very fine translator. And Michelina Tenace is, get this, the chairman of the Department of Theology at the Pontifical Gregorian University. I was like, what? that's unheard of even 20 years ago. Her specialty is actually Orthodox theology. She's totally fluent in French and in Italian. And she also lectures on Ignatian spirituality and on systematics. So those are the women. The men are Piero Coda. Monsignor Coda is the dean of the Sophia University in Florence. Roberto Dodaro is an Augustinian friar who had been the president of the Augustinianum. And then he was teaching there. Santiago Madrigal, a Jesuit from Comillas University in Madrid. Karl-Heinz Menke is a retired professor of systematics from Bonn. Amable Muzzoni is a Salesian father from Rwanda, who is a consultor to the Congregation for Saints and a professor of ecclesiology at the Salesian Theologate there in Rome. Bernard Poitier is the Jesuit who is a professor of ecclesiology and patristics at the Jesuit Theologate in Brussels. He was secretary to the commission. Michelina Tenace was the chair of the commission, and then we were all under the guidance of Cardinal Louis Ladaria, a Jesuit, who is the prefect for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. We met in the rooms of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Typically, we'd go over and have 9 o'clock mass, and then go next door, and they have this big U-shaped table with kind of microphones, and you'd punch the microphone, or you'd raise your hand and be acknowledged, and then you'd be able to speak, and nobody else could speak. So basically, 12 academics sitting around, and as you must know, if you have 12 academics, you probably have, I'd say, about maybe 20 different opinions, so, and so that's who we were. The indications from the Holy Father, and people have asked me if I had the same intuition they did. He seems to be interested in calling us back together. He did not say that to me. I lived in the house with him for the past 10 days, but I hope he does, because I left my windbreaker there. I forgot it. But he, you just don't know. He's got a lot of other things on his mind. I had breakfast yesterday morning with Cardinal Humes from Franciscan from Brazil, from Sao Paulo, who is there to prepare the working document for the Synod on the Amazon, which will happen in October. So there's lots of stuff going on. But I will tell you that paragraph 19, I think, of the Lineamenta, which is the outline, has official ministry for women. And I've had endless conversations about what, reading tea leaves on what that might mean. And I think the best explanation that calmed me down was that official ministry for women is not just the diaconate, but it would include installed ministries of lector and acolyte. Why do I care? Well, because you need to be installed a lector and an acolyte before you're ordained a deacon. So, now there was, and I don't have I have a memory of walking in the between CDF and the Casa Santa Marta, where we lived, where the Holy Father lives, with Bernard Poitier, and he said something to the effect, like 20 years ago, there was a synod that said all people, including women, should be eligible and are eligible to be installed as lectors and acolytes. And for the past 24 hours, everybody's been looking for that. I just can't find the citation, but I am sure that that's the case. And I did say that to Cardinal Humes yesterday, that I know that a previous synod had made that recommendation. So I don't know. I mean, but there's lots of stuff going on over there, not to mention the sex stuff. Cardinal O'Malley was in town. So releasing the new sex laws, and that's good too. So anyway, you got more, Colleen?
Oh yeah, we got plenty more.
Well,
Yeah, people are very interested. This kind of goes to that point. There's the rumor that you may be called back together. But will you try to work together? Are you in communication with people otherwise outside of that setting, or
that gets inside? That gets inside the commission. So, I mean, I did run into Mariana Schlosser at breakfast yesterday in Casa Santa Marta, and we did chat about something. But Poitier and I were at Fordham University on January 15th. That is available online. You can see that. And Poitier and I also just last month, I think it was last month, I don't know what month this is, we're in March, yeah, maybe about a month ago, we were in Portugal together speaking at the Catholic University of Portugal in Lisbon, and again at the Catholic University of Portugal in Porto. And I know that the Lisbon event, which I think was real fun, was because Poitier, aside from being fluent in French and German and Dutch, and he's also fluent in Portuguese, that has been filmed, and I don't know who filmed it. I don't know whether the Paulinas sisters, who in, get this, 7 weeks translated Women Deacons Past, Present, Future into Portuguese. I don't know whether they did the filming or if the Professor Luisa Almeida did the filming. So I don't know where that filming is, but I do know that our sponsoring group at the university was going directly into a state review of their program, so they probably didn't have much time to fool around with videotape. But if that gets, if we get that, we'll put that online. But right now, what's online is January 15th, Salt and Light TV, Poitier and me, and Sister Donna Ciangio, who's the Chancellor of the Archdiocese of Newark, and we are moderated by Thomas Rosica as well, and then hosted by David Gibson there at Fordham. Give me more questions.
That's great. I'll put that link up in a second. But another question for you, Phyllis. The questioner says, I'd be grateful if Dr. Zagano would give more details about the fact that the commission wasn't able to come to a conclusion, which we've kind of already covered. But does this mean that the issue is now supposed to fade away, or will there be more study? The questioner says, I guess the question is, what's next for women in regards to more official leadership in the church?
Well, that's about 14 questions there. I can't talk about the commission. I have no idea what will happen. In terms of the future of women in the church, I think the future is now. Women are doing diaconal work unofficially. Women are obviously the backbone of the church. I have said quite forcefully at table, so let me back up a little bit. When I go over there, I live in Domus Sancta Marte, which has three sections. One section's a little corner where the Pope eats with his staff or guests. Another section is where the men who live in the house all the time eat, and that's about 40 men. And then on the other side of the Great Salad Bar Divide is the guest area, and that's where I will be, and any guest of the house. And the guests of the house, we just sit down, and you could, you're sitting next to cardinals and bishops and specialists. The Pontifical Academy for Science is in town. So I was spending a lot of time talking about artificial intelligence. And then the Noah's Ark crowd were in, so we're talking about water. I mean, but I really can't talk about the any kind of communication we have, and I don't know. I really don't know. It seems that he would have us come back. I don't know, Mm-hmm. And as I said earlier, I hope he does, because I left my windbreaker there. So
you never know. The next time you see him, he may be wearing it.
Yes.
Phyllis, yeah, you never know. Phyllis, a question. When you see all the inequality for women in the church, and the questioner says, it never seems to change. So what keeps you remaining in the church, and how do you not get discouraged? You know what?
it's not, Mother Teresa used to say this, it's not about being successful, it's just about being faithful. It's about, I did another speech at Santa Clara University, me, Gary Macy, hosted by Paul Crowley. And at the end, and I believe this, it's about Jesus Christ. It's not about winning, and it's not about power, and it's not about status. It's not about place. It's about Jesus Christ. And so what keeps me is going is the gospel and the needs of the people of God. I mean, it's as simple as that. I am, at the end of the reports, at the end of my comments, I said to the media the other day, you know, women, we have 1.3 billion Catholics in the world. We have another 0.7 billion. So there's total 2 billion Christians. There's 5 billion others. Okay, half of those people are female. And many of them are in cultures and countries that do not value women. Cultures and countries where they still allow or have wife beating. Cultures and countries where they have dowry burnings, FGM, menstruation huts. There's all sorts of really terrible things that are done to women. And so I guess my quest is not so much for me, but my quest is for the church to be able to have a woman standing next to the Holy Father, holding the gospel, proclaiming the gospel in St. Peter's. And thereby the church would be saying that women are made in the image and likeness of God. We say it, but we don't image it. And if you go to Mass in St. Peter's, I mean, there's a lot of testosterone there, you know, and it's kind of a hard thing to see when you think of the people, you know, the people of the world. Now, that's not to say people aren't crowding St. Peter's. I was in the Vatican Museum on Saturday, and the only thing to me that it's like is a New York City subway. I never saw so many people, and the same thing in the square. So the people do come, and it's more than just to see a monument, you know. It's more than just to go see the Taj Mahal. I mean, this is more than about the building. I think it's about the gospel. So what draws me and keeps me going is the gospel, not the. It took me 17 hours to get home yesterday. Not the plane rides, you know, not the eating with the Cardinals. It's just to do something to make sure that the world, a little bit of the world, has a little bit more of the gospel. I think that's to me what it's about.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Phyllis. Phyllis, a question that came in on the chat function from Donna and Margaret. Can you talk about what the rules were for governing discussion around the commission? There was just a question about why you couldn't say more. But just to...
Papal secret. It's a papal secret. And until, in terms of the internal discussion in the commission, we can never talk about that. In terms of what we produced for the Holy Father, for his personal reflection, it's up to him to release. And I don't know what he released. And I just have to wait. I did ask Sister Pat Murray, the executive director, Sister Carmen Samet, the president, Sister Sally Hodgkins, the vice president, and Patrizia Morgante, the communications director of UISG, for a copy of what they got. And, you know, I haven't gotten it. I think, and now they've just had an election. They've elected a Polish sister as their new president, but Pat Murray is still the executive director. So I think they'll have meetings with their new board of 10 sisters and decide when, if, and how they will release it. So until it's made public, I really can't say. I can't say what it is anyway. And until something is made public, I can't comment on it.
Thanks for clarifying that, Phyllis. One second, let me just look at my list. So now that we're kind of at the place that we're at, based on the folks' comments and the need for further study, what would you say that we as, lay people, everyday people could do to advance the cause?
Okay, well, now's when I have to go digging in my books. If you just hold on for a minute, because I thought I had it here. I do. This book, I don't know if you can see it. Is it up there, Colleen? I lost you.
Yep, you're up there.
Okay. This book is in French, English, and in Portuguese. And it has a free downloadable study guide for use in groups and parishes, convents, wherever. And it's past, present, future. Gary Macy presents the history. Bill Deitrig talks about the contemporary development of the diaconate, and I talk about what would happen in the future. It's also available on some kind of download from the French and the English. I don't know if the Portuguese is downloadable yet. The Portuguese is published only in Portugal right now. The French is published in France and in Canada. I can tell you the Archbishop of Paris, whom I had breakfast with twice, asked for a copy of it in French, so we're going to get that to him. And the English is all over the place. And if we're talking about having more conversation, I think it's the Holy Father once said, I think, to the Synod on Youth, make noise, and that's important. Make your voice heard. He talks about synodality. In terms of my own writing, I've just published co-published with Eric Berelza, a Jesuit sociologist, a review of 3 studies, of 2 scientific and 1 online, of what American Catholics think about women deacons. And it's pretty positive, like 75 to 78%. And then I have coming a co-authored article with Bernard Poitier in French called, in English called, it's in French, but the English title is What Do We Know About Women Deacons? I'm finishing a book, another book about women deacons, and this summer I want to write a children's book about women deacons. What everybody else can do is learn about the topic first and then make noise. I don't care whether you take your bishop to lunch, take your pastor, write letters to the editor. Years ago, I had a Fulbright to Waterford, actually not that long years ago, maybe 4 years ago. And the head of the Fulbright Commission said, you have to move this discussion into the public media. It's around the Catholic media. You got to make it public and make it more of a discussion topic for people who are not church mice. And I think that's just talk about it and let your interest be known. People talk about, we'll have a postcard campaign. That doesn't go anyplace. I can tell you, if you write a letter to the editor or an op-ed and it's published and you have your bishop's name in it, he will get it. Okay, he'll get it quicker than if you write him a letter, because his clip service will put it on his desk. He sees when his name is in the newspapers. So that's something you could do. But I think I really would like people, and pray. I was at Mass at a place called Caravita in Rome Sunday, and they prayed for vocations to the priesthood and religious life. I'm like, excuse me, let's pray for deacons too. Those kinds of things, if you have the opportunity to stick that in. Sister Sandy Damazzi, who is a catechist and director of liturgy at St. Rose of Lima in Short Hills, New Jersey, along with Sister Donna Ciangio, whom I said before is the Chancellor of the Archdiocese of Newark, prepared this study guide. It's an excellent study guide. But Sister Sandy also prepared a novena of prayer about women deacons, which I think ended yesterday or Sunday. And it's a really nice novena, and I want to get a copy of it. I was following it in Rome, but I want to get a copy of it because I think that's something that could be done by families, groups, institutes. I just keep There's a book called Keep the Aspidistra Flying, and I think that's really kind of what I'm thinking about here. But I'm seeing a bunch of chats here, so let's get going. We got 14, 15.
Yeah, we've got, well, I think a really great point from Kate, which you just spoke to, Phyllis, is, that it's really important to make positive, helpful noise. It's important to get your voices out there, and especially in the print, in the press, in the public. So, let's see. Oh, they want to know if we can have a copy of the novena. But here's a question. Yeah, I'll see if we can find that, if we can get a copy of it. Here's a question from Jay. Are you familiar with the idea that Jesus didn't foresee or intend the creation of the church?
No.
I have another set of questions that came in via email, Phyllis, which speaks about if the female diaconate was put into place. So assuming that the Pope were to say yes, what would you foresee being the biggest roadblock for women in terms of the application process or formation? Would it be the same type of formation as for men? Who would decide that? Would it be the diocese, the Vatican, or on the parish level?
Okay, well, take a few steps back. When the Holy See rolled out the male diaconate, it was given to the Episcopal conferences to decide if their territories needed to have deacons. So individual Episcopal conferences said, yes, we want them. Ireland only said yes about 6-7 years ago. Then each individual bishop would decide what he wanted for his diocese. But within that, the overarching program for formation and education is the directory. There's a directory for the formation of deacons, and it follows spiritual, human, intellectual, and pastoral formation. Then it becomes tweaked, and it becomes particularized for a particular church, for the church in Philadelphia, the church in Newark, church in Los Angeles. The education in some places is done in academic settings, in some places it's done in seminary settings, and it just depends on how the bishop wants to do it. And some bishops don't want deacons at all. The Diocese of Lincoln, Nebraska does not train deacons, period. And so that it. Did I answer the question? I think I did.
I think you did. Let me just pull up my list real quick. And there's a follow-up to that. Would you expect that the role of women deacons would be limited in comparison to that of men, based on the history of women deacons? Like maybe would women deacons only be able to serve in terms of baptisms and pastoral work?
Yeah. Well, again, that depends on what you're assigned. We know that in history, first of all, in history, everybody didn't do everything every place. We know that in every time. We're talking about thousands of years, thousands of parishes, and thousands of women deacons. Did everyone get assigned every single thing the same way by every bishop or pastor at every place? No. Do deacons in your parish preach? Do deacons in your parish run the soup kitchen? Do your deacons in your parish do the weddings? Do they? It depends on the situation. I think in terms of what they would be permitted to do would be the same. What they could receive faculties to preach, and to be a single judge on a tribunal, and to be a witness at a wedding, a marriage, and to solemnly baptize. Those are the big four most people think about. They would be the same. But then what they're assigned by their bishop and their pastor would vary from time to time and place to place. So, it depends. I think the culture, individual cultures, and Cardinal Hume said this to me yesterday at breakfast, the individual cultures would accept it in different ways. Certainly in the United States, I don't think it'd be that much of a problem, although within the United States, everybody knows that there are pastors who would have a problem. But there are pastors who have problems with male deacons. I can't account for the psychosexual development of every pastor and bishop and priest in the world. We have to work with what we deal with and just kind of understand that. As I said in Santa Clara, even St. Peter was a bit of a jerk. So, you work with what you've got, because and just trust that you have people and you work with them as much as you can.
Okay, just a follow-up on a piece that you spoke about there, Phyllis. Even before the implementation of the female diaconate, is there the possibility of bishops allowing or giving faculties to suitable women to preach at Mass?
No.
Yeah.
No. And I saw some kind of an article while I was in Rome about somebody saying, "Oh, women should preach at Mass." It can't happen. If women are speaking at Mass, they're not preaching a homily. The law is that only a cleric who participates in a Mass is able to preach a homily at the proper time after the gospel. We have one sort of wiggle room, which is that, well, actually two. One wiggle room is Masses specifically for children, that someone better able to explain the gospel to them than the priest could do that. And the other one is the language situation, that someone who has the language that the congregation has and the priest doesn't have the language that the congregation has. But in those cases, it's not technically a homily. It's not preaching, because the homily is technically speaking on behalf of the bishop, and the bishop can only give permission to the person who's speaking on his behalf to a cleric. So that's it. And then there are the rest about a reflection after communion and all that. But no, lay preaching can be all over the world, but not as a homily after the and it should be all over the world, but not as a homily after the gospel.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying that, Phyllis. A question from Sandy, and hopefully this will come through clear. So the point has been made in terms of discussion around the female diaconate, that what's at hand is that we're seeking that for women to become deacons and not creating another track for women. So do you think that Rome is clear on that request, or are they trying to decide on a diaconate for women? Does that make sense?
I don't know who Rome is, okay? I just know that the Holy Father said that if he's going to make a sacramental decree, he needs a little more information. Mm-hmm. So I know that Cardinal Casper years ago, we can tell them they can dress up, they can be on the altar, and we can give them special permission to do this, that, and the other thing, but they wouldn't be ordained. And that's a non-starter. And I've said quite loudly outside the commission, at least, that would be disastrous, because then the further question is, why can't you ordain them? Well, if you're going to say I can't be ordained because the Holy Spirit can't do it because it's a girl, that's one reason. Well, I'm not made in the image and likeness of Christ. The real reason is they fear women priests. But again, I'd refer to Canon 1008, paragraph 3, promulgated by Benedict XVI, that separates the ministry of the diaconate from the sacerdotal ministry.
Thank you, Phyllis. A couple more questions, and I just encourage people, if you have anything else, you can type it into the chat. A question about, authority and women deacons, or who has authority over a permanent deacon. Is that the local bishop, or who makes those decisions?
Well, it depends. If you're a cleric, you're incardinated. That means you belong to somebody. A Jesuit is incardinated into the Society of Jesus, and a diocesan cleric, a secular cleric, is incardinated into the Archdiocese of Newark or the Archdiocese of Philadelphia or New York or wherever. The person who has the episcopal authority over the deacon is the bishop, okay, in the place where the individual works. The person who has the missioning authority over the person, over the deacon, would be the religious superior, is the religious superior, who missions the individual deacon to a work. And by that I mean, and sisters ask this question a lot, if a woman religious is an ordained deacon, and she's ordained in Philadelphia, and she has faculties in Philadelphia, and she finds herself a job in Philadelphia. She then asks her general superior for permission to take the job. And if the general superior gives her the permission to take the job, it is then approved by the bishop. But that doesn't matter whether you're a deacon or not. I mean, anyone really, technically, who gets a job in a ministry, public ministry, in any diocesan or archdiocesan location, does so by leave of the bishop. Now, say this sister who was ordained in Philadelphia and has a job in Philadelphia finds another job in the Archdiocese of Newark. She finds the job, but she goes to her superior to take the job, to accept the job, and then to Newark to have her faculties received. All right, well, she's a real hotshot now, and the folks in New York want her, so the bishop in New York wants her to come. Can he force her to come? And the answer is no, because it's her general superior that manages her mission, not anybody else. The canon law builds a wall around convents, and it's a very clear wall that people, I think, don't always appreciate one way or the other. But so no one works except by dint of the bishop's permission, and no one is missioned, particularly for religious, except by dint of the religious superior, the general superior of the individual. When you said who has authority over the deacon, I kind of laughed, because the deacon's wives get involved here, and they have to be consulted before the deacon is ordained. And I think I would think that, as in any marriage, there's discussion when there's a job change. So that's kind of it.
Okay. Phyllis, another question about really women's kind of roles in the church and the ability to govern. And I think it was an encouraging sign that on the commission there was equal representation. And so would deacons, would being in the diaconate allow women to have a greater, I guess, governing authority or a greater voice within the hierarchy of the church?
Somebody asked me this question yesterday, and it was at breakfast, lunch, or dinner. I can't remember. It was at breakfast, probably, because I was in lunch on the airplane. First of all, it was dinner. It was dinner the night before. Governance doesn't apply with deacons. Governance really is in persona Christi Capitis Ecclesiae, the person of Christ, the head of the church. That's governance. Jurisdiction also doesn't apply to deacons, because really, technically, the bishop or the pastor has jurisdiction. Having said that, governance, other kinds of governments, when you're thinking about managerial government, or other kinds of jurisdiction, when you're thinking about delegated authority, these are, to my mind, easier to give. The one is easier to give to a deacon. The other is impossible to give to a layperson. That is, it is impossible for a bishop to delegate the authority to render a judgment of nullity in a marriage tribunal, in a marriage case, to a non-cleric. A tribunal can have 2 lay people and 1 cleric, has to have 1 cleric, but a single judgment, if it is rendered, must be rendered, and by rendered I mean the official signature, must be rendered by a cleric. So I think it could be easier. I've said before, people talk about women cardinals. I think it'd be easier to have a woman cardinal than a woman deacon at this point, but it'd be really easy to have a woman cardinal deacon, which is an official status of a cardinal. So I think it would be easier, and I think it would be preferable. Why? because the bishop would have trained, ordained, and given faculties to the individual. You know, you're either an officer of the corporation or you're not. I think it would be, certainly the individual would have the ability to preach. And that gets back to my presenting point about the value of women. The value of women. I mean, so much that was done by UISG was about trafficking and the discussion, trafficking, the abuse of children, abuse of sisters. So a lot of it is, I think it helps. I'm seeing chats come in, but I can't read them. I'm afraid to touch anything because...
You're good, Phyllis. I will be your eyes, your ears, and your voice. The question that just came in, if the Pope feels the need for the commission to all agree on the historical basis of women deacons before deciding to reintroduce them, do you think that's ever likely to happen? Is he looking for total consensus, or is he just looking for more evidence?
You have to ask him.
Oh.
I really don't know. You know, write him a letter and ask him. I mean, send him a note and ask him, you know, what he wants. This is a conversation that's been going on for 400 years. In 1655 and again in 1695, a book was published by a man named Jean Morin, and it reviewed all of the ordination ceremonies of women. And he concluded, Morin concluded, that these ceremonies met the criteria, sacramental criteria of the Council of Trent. 100 years later, a man named Jean Pien said, oh, no, they didn't. And that's been going back and forth. There was another spate of discussion in the 70s, and some very major, really, Cipriano Bagaggini, Philippe Delay, I mean, names that really are in historical. These men wrote that, yes, in fact, they were and could be sacramentally ordained. Problem is that the definition of sacrament really comes around in the Middle Ages, kind of almost after women stopped being ordained as deacons. And that's, I think, where the abbess comment comes on, because you had the female diaconate repeatedly or continually put into the monastery, and typically it would be the abbess and maybe 2 or 3 others who could be hebbies and could manage the diaconal needs of the monastery. But as the female diaconate, but it was always the abbess, and then the tradition of the abbess deacon is a deacon, a woman deacon, Teresa, my name just went out of my head, Teresa Smith, in England, who's an Anglican deacon, and she has a whole paper on the tradition of the deacon abbess. But eventually, as the ceremonials for abbesses were developed, the diaconal ordination part of it fell away. Why? Because no one was being ordained, as I said at the top, no one was being ordained as deacons unless he, always a he, was going to be ordained a priest. So the ceremonies changed as we get into the later Middle Ages. So I think that's where the abbess comment came from in the Pope. And as I said, I've just gotten home last night, and I haven't reviewed the tape, and I haven't reviewed the transcript of the airplane. So I don't know. But I'll probably write about it in my next column. I have to look at it. I have a column due. And probably run, I think May 22nd is when it would run. I can look it up right here. May 20, probably around 22nd of May. I'll have a column after I've studied the transcripts. So.
Wonderful. Well, Phyllis, we'll keep an eye out for that article, but we've come that was a quick hour. We came to the end of our webinar. And so is there anything else you'd like to tell us about that's going on?
Well, sure, but I can't.
I meant, do you have any talks coming up, or, gonna plug anything?
Oh yeah, plugs. Yeah, we have to make it. I'm a little jet lagged here. Well, here's the deal. In September, I'm going to be in It's not in Norfolk, but it's in Hampton Roads. It's down by Norfolk, Virginia, on the 17th of September, in the evening, at about 7-ish, 7:30, 6:30, something like that. The Bishop Keene Institute. You know, when I have these talks, if folks sign up for my to receive my column, at the bottom of my column, when they send it to you from NCR, it has the upcoming talks, and I'm pretty sure that one is listed. That's also listed on my website, and also on my website there's downloadable copies of the study guides, as I mentioned, also downloadable copies of the articles, downloadable copies of and also listings of upcoming talks. I am negotiating a couple more talks next year, in four of them in Europe, but thankfully all in English, and a couple more in the United States on the East Coast right now. And then probably next February, I think the date is 21 to 23, at Anaheim is the Los Angeles Religious Education Congress, and I haven't been formally invited yet, but we had 4,000 people having a great old time in the arena when I spoke there last time, and they told me they'll have me back. So that's it. I get a lot of invitations, but I've been hesitant to take any before I came back from Rome, just to see what if anything was going to come out of Rome. So now this is all I know. You know as much as I do at this point, really. I don't mean to be facetious, but I will tell you that of the people on the commission, Bernard Poitier published a book 20 years ago about the diaconate and included the women's diaconate. Karl-Heinz Menke, I think, published an article in 2016. I am not aware of any publications by any of the others specifically on female deacons. So I'd ask you to read my stuff and pass it around. Okay.
Well, Phyllis, thank you so much for enriching our conversation and sharing all your wisdom and really just starting this dialogue. We hope that it will continue much further beyond this webinar. And so thank you so much for that. And thank you everyone for taking the time today to be with us. And have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.